So today we'll be getting a very interesting update. Maintenance will begin at 15 UTC to 17 UTC, at least for PC. Now with this update, most notably we'll be seeing an increase to the damage of the Band of Air. And I went and tested versus the live server and the preview server, where they usually push out updates to the preview server before moving them to live. And well, having a look at my data, I see literally no change with regards to its damage. You can see Touch of Wind hitting maximum hit 59,000. We check the live server and it's exactly the same. Touch of Wind 59,000 maximum hit, and that's using exactly the same character, just simply copied over with the exact same stats, item level, etc. And so with the Band of Air still only dealing like 10,000 encounter DPS, you can probably push that up to maybe 15,000 encounter DPS if you're lucky, and perhaps with artifact calls a little bit higher. But that's on a class that can like hit with an at-will 5 times a second, and that means it's pretty much the best class to be able to activate the Band of Air. And so with that in mind, the Touch of Wind still only dealing like 15,000 encounter DPS at most on, let's say, an 80k item level build. That's still only like 3% of your damage. And if we do indeed see a buff, as they state here, by 20%, you're going from like 15,000 encounter DPS to like 18,000 encounter DPS. And ultimately, if you're again dealing like 500,000 encounter DPS, which you should be at least, you can deal up to 600,000 encounter DPS on a maxed out rogue build, the ring will still only deal like 3.5% of your overall damage, which means having stats is still going to be better. Even with the new rings coming out, actually getting fixed, they also give more item level. Now, I wouldn't go with like a 3% damage ring here. You're better off with a true 3% damage like the Band of Air than that, as 3% to your damage buffs means it gets decreased the more damage buffs you have. So you want to use other rings, and very fortunately they've actually gone and fixed Illustra's Obligation and Illustra's Beauty, so they actually give the correct stats and actually work the way they say they do. Now unfortunately they only give 5% of the stats, but they do give you a bit more item level, which is not something insignificant if you're running unscaled content. And on top of that, when you have the set, you also gain the ability to gain a chunk of Forte. And that's not to note that you can't just use the Illustra's Grace Ring, which I've already made a build update where you can make that work along with like the Vistani set, and it works great. The unfortunate thing is they've said that the Illustra's Grace Ring should no longer incorrectly stack between different sources. That doesn't mean that 2 people using it is a bad idea, because then you can have your buff active and then while somebody else might not have theirs, and then they might have their active while you don't have yours, as it's very hard to have like the effect up 100% of the time, especially if on the rogue you're relying on the set bonus to proc on a 10% chance to trigger it to gain the bonus, which is very viable, and you can get it to have like a 66% uptime fairly confidently against your enemies because of that ability to deal damage around you, which procs. For example, we go over to this dummy, we should be able to see that proc there, the ring, when we trigger that area damage. There you go. We have Illustra's Grace. You can just about make out the icon, which is the same tooltip as you see with the ring. And so that's with this patch. Those rings giving stats, Illustra's Obligation should correctly give you the critical strike and crit severity when you're against 2 or more enemies, and your Illustra's Beauty should correctly give you combat advantage, and the power unfortunately won't be all the time, only again when you're against 2 or more enemies. And those of you healers out there, the Illustra's Benediction will actually give combat advantage instead of, as I stated before, giving accuracy. Now you may have seen these dashing chapos, these dashing hats, and we'll just have a quick look at those there. Unfortunately, they got rid of your hair. And well, on the previous server, they're still getting rid of our hair, and you can get those fancy hats, or this fancy hat, from the Zen market pretty much. You can see that just here in the keys section, but it's a bug that it removes your hair. And apparently with this update, the hat should no longer like shave your hair, but just provide a temporary haircut. Again, temporary. It should show your original hair. And well, they're still working on a fix for that apparently. Now you might have tried go for some of these achievements and you might have ran into the issue with the hardcore skirmisher achievement, and well, this should now properly fix that. You should once again be able to actually gain the benefit from completing Illusionist Gambit, Prophecy of Manas, Throne of the Dwarven Gods and Merchant Prince's Folly on hardcore mode to gain that achievement. I find it utterly pointless, but each to his own. Ultimately, the Stronghold food, you can see we have an example of ratatouille here. The stats have got increased massively. I made an overview video on that before, going over all of them, and you can see copying it to the previous server, the food now gives like 20,000 HP and 4,000 accuracy. And that also means this barmaid in Chult also has her food increased. And you may have seen that you could buy like Everfrost damage resistance. And that was this one right here. It's now giving outgoing healing instead. Again, the Stronghold versions will give 20,000 HP and 4,000 stats. So it would give 4,000 outgoing healing. That's great for healers now, just being able to get more of that stat. But of course you can use power, you can use crit strike instead. You can view all of the stats just there, and it's very simple. And very nicely, they will be retroactively updating, at least that's what I can see via the previous server. They could do a real scummy move and change that, but it's unlikely. Very likely they're not going to do what they did before with the old event foods, keeping the old version and the new version and not updating all the existing ones. They really should have, but back then it would have been seen as like a heavy nerf to something that people have spent lots of time to obtain, and so I understand why they didn't want to do it then. But with this just becoming a significant increase, nobody's going to complain, right, when their retroactive food is getting updated. Who needs Everfrost resistance? You're better off having outgoing healing. And FYI, Everfrost is out of the window. They no longer exist in game. You may have run into the issue in your Cragmire Crypts where Mr. Blackdagger tries to hop onto the ceiling and, well, you couldn't then fight him. You had to let your companions kill him off. Well, that should be fixed now. Overall, you can see the entire list of the patch notes there. I pretty much went over everything that was meaningful, and you can go and read it up on yourself if you want to. Just a few tooltip fixes here and there, and like Draconic Resilience properly giving critical avoidance, Dasnar Trubo properly respawning, and the difficulty in your Thane encounters in the Scarlet Caverns being basically reduced. They were a bit challenging, I guess. A few fixes in Undermountain in Vladimir's lair. You should probably be able to obtain the Dark Dealer title if before you had the Dragon Hunter title. And on PlayStation, you may have ran into the issue where you couldn't claim like the Renegade Drow race unlock from the Way of the Drow choice pack. Well, you should be able now. There was a bug with like the Scent lockbox, Blood War lockbox, and the lockbox of the Mad Mage, where you're occasionally only obtaining like 2 items instead of 3. Yeah, not going to retroactively compensate anybody for that, but it is what it is. And otherwise, R.I.P. the sword spam. Yeah, the Teacup Fey Wolf was spawning an unlimited amount of swords, and they were just lying around everywhere. You may have seen my video on that, and you may have noticed just by playing the game the sheer amount of them just lying everywhere. It's a bit nuts. Sure, it was a bit of fun, but I'm sure some people probably experienced a bit more lag than normal due to it. Otherwise, some players may have issues with having like multiple battle horns or the Forger's box and the Chain of Scales equipped on the one loadout and then can't like switch to that loadout. A very simple fix was simply to just go right click on your item and click apply to all loadouts. Like let's say I have my Forger's box on cooldown and I want to switch to a loadout which doesn't have it equipped. You can now very simply apply item to all loadouts if you hadn't noticed. As very useful. It was very frustrating not being able to switch to a loadout where I wanted to switch from my tank to my healer or my paladin and not being able to do so because it was on freaking cooldown. Well, we can simply avoid that now by applying to all loadouts. But the fix should help those that hadn't realized that and yeah, weren't able to switch those loadouts where they had both equipped. So just a quick patch. Again, nothing much I can do with testing the Band of Air just yet, because there seems to have been no change on the previous server just yet. Even with it being changed, big ass T-Rex, I don't see the ring as becoming very useful. The problem with it is its damage is still going to be very chance related. Since their proc chance, the ability to gain the extra damage, is really random now. Like, it's much harder to activate it since they removed all the other things that can proc it, trigger it. You can't really rely on to gain its damage during like your artifact call, and that's what endgame really orientates around, that burst damage in an artifact call. So if you can just make your bigger hits bigger with stats, that is generally better than just having something which is RNG, whether or not you gain the bonus damage. It's still usable, it's still a viable ring. You just not great when you're trying to just obtain that maximum amount of burst damage in a short window. It's good damage over time, especially on some classes which can proc it a lot more than others. For example, a rogue. Personally, will I use it? Most likely no. I like my stat rings, and yeah, it's still not going to deal much damage at all. And if it's not dealing reliable, consistent damage for me, it's not an option, especially within Master Temple of the Spider, where you need to be killing barrels, you need to be killing cocoons, you need to be killing those demons, and you need to have the damage then and there. And you're better off having an increase to your powers, which you know you can hit with when you want to hit with, than just having something which is going to be a chance to occur. Special thank you again to all of these channel members for their added support. We'll see you guys around. Goodbye for now.